Just days before a high-stakes state visit, Buckingham Palace is forced into crisis mode. A long-dormant scandal has roared back to life. A senior political figure linked in reports to the Epstein saga has been abruptly removed from a pivotal transatlantic role, and a rare second state visit for Donald Trump is barreling forward with a momentum the palace did not intend. The carefully scripted showcase of Anglo-American unity now competes with headlines about reputational risk, protocol friction, and a sudden vacuum in diplomatic orchestration. King Charles III, intent on projecting continuity and calm, must confront a perfect storm he neither invited nor needs. For months, the machinery of ceremony moved with clockwork precision. Schedules were mapped to the minute, guest lists refined, wardrobes, menus, music, motorcades, all tuned to the optics of stability. The message was meant to be simple: Britain is steady, and its special relationship with Washington remains unshaken. But in the narrow corridor of days before wheels down, the narrative veered. Reports from Westminster described the startling dismissal of a senior Labour peer recently tapped to steer the UK's presence in Washington, a figure whose experience promised to smooth the sharp edges of a politically fraught season. The stated rationale: troubling questions surrounding past associations with Jeffrey Epstein. In an instant, the personnel story became a geopolitical one. The post meant to anchor the diplomatic choreography of a presidential visit fell into uncertainty, and with it the sense of seamless control the palace hoped to project. Within the royal household, frustration leaked in the most British of ways, not in public rebukes, but in measured laments. Courtiers have been described as grumbling that the timing could hardly be worse, an admission that reveals how narrow the margin for error is when pageantry doubles as policy. The institution built to stand above politics finds itself dragged, once again, to the edge of it. For Charles, who has labored to establish a reign of dutiful restraint after a lifetime in waiting, the return of Prince Andrew to the headlines is an unwanted echo. The Duke of York's association with Epstein, a stain the family hoped time, silence, and distance would fade, has resurfaced precisely when discretion was paramount. Every fresh mention of that name threatens to frame the coming visuals not as unity and continuity, but as a monarchy haunted by its recent past. The stakes are heightened by the unusual shape of the visit itself. A second state visit for the same American principal is rare enough to be notable on its own. Add to that months of behind-the-scenes debate about format, palace preference for a softened, informal encounter versus government appetite for full regalia, and a high-visibility handshake. According to well-placed whispers, what the palace floated as a gentle off-ramp, a cozier prelude to manage risk, was recognized, across the Atlantic, as a delay tactic. The response, blunt and unmistakable: go big, go formal, go now. And Downing Street, prioritizing strategic optics, pressed the gas. The sovereign's preference yielded to the government's calculus. The result is a ceremony locked in, and a palace left to execute a show it would rather have staged later. What does an ambassador-level gap mean at such a moment? In practical terms, it removes the conductor from an already complex orchestra. That figure coordinates not just policy talking points, but the texture of interaction: who stands where, who speaks when, how to pivot if the unexpected occurs. Without that steady hand, marginal missteps can escalate into headline fodder. In Washington, protocol is politics. In London, optics are inheritance. The margin for improvisation narrows to a knife's edge when both are in play. The pressure point is not simply image, it's alignment. The palace's role in a state visit is ceremonial and symbolic. The government's role is strategic and transactional. When those two logics diverge, when the Crown wants risk mitigation and the Cabinet wants maximum signal, the ceremony can tilt into friction. Insiders have occasionally described the current dynamic in a single unsparing word: embarrassing. Not because the institution cannot deliver spectacle, it can and will, but because the subtext is showing. Letters proposing one tempo, counterletters demanding another, a slow-walking overture met by a hard-charging insistence. When the curtain rises, the audience should not see the tug-of-war over the ropes. Then there is the Andrew factor, which carries unique gravitational pull. The palace, mindful of public sentiment, long ago withdrew him from frontline duties. Yet the legal and reputational residue remains a shadow cast across any moment of maximum visibility. Even without new facts, the mere re-emergence of his name in proximity to Epstein reloads a narrative the monarchy would prefer to leave in the archive. It risks reframing every camera pan, from guard of honor to banquet table, as a test of how well the crown can compartmentalize. And that is exactly the frame the palace seeks to avoid, the monarchy as crisis manager of its own past. Set against that, the government's calculation is unambiguous. In an unsettled world, the UK wants to display muscular continuity with Washington. A full state visit photographs better than a private meeting. It signals resolve to allies and adversaries alike. It floods the airwaves with images of gilded ceilings and allied hands locked in ritual. And in politics, images often outrun subtleties. That is why the dismissed appointment matters. It scrambles the backstage even as the front of house prepares the spotlight. A single absent conductor can leave 100 virtuosos looking over their shoulders for cues. All of this places Charles in a particularly delicate posture. He must embody permanence, the sovereign a steady keel, while piloting through chop he did not chart. He cannot look aggrieved, cannot seem reactive, cannot allow the sense that pressure arrives from any other capital than his own. Yet he must absorb the reality that this visit was shaped, in part, by forces outside the palace walls. A partner who plays by different theatrical rules, and a domestic political imperative that prizes bold optics over cautious sequencing. The late Queen could count on deference that softened such collisions. Charles faces a sharper media environment, and an audience trained by years of scandal-inflected coverage to read every gesture as a clue. So what happens if the visit proceeds flawlessly? The cameras will capture the choreography the palace still does better than any institution on earth. A procession that compresses centuries into a day, a banquet where history and diplomacy briefly speak the same language. Analysts will say the special relationship is alive, if not uncomplicated. The risk is that flawless execution no longer inoculates against narrative drift. One stray comment, one pointed question shouted by a correspondent, one viral clip coupled with a familiar name, and the story returns to the swamp the palace wants to drain. If, on the other hand, the visit encounters turbulence, it will not be chalked up to coincidence. Critics will argue that the crown tried to slow roll for a reason, that Downing Street overruled prudence, that reputational risk, left unmanaged, did exactly what risk does. Allies will shrug and say the show went on. Opponents will insist it should not have. In either case, the monarchy will have been forced to spend its most precious currency, a political authority, in a marketplace where the price is set by others. There is, however, a narrow path through this minefield. It runs on discipline, fewer unscripted encounters, tighter grip on optics, relentless focus on common purpose. The palace can do what it has done in harder times, make the ceremony itself the message. If the images are clean and the sequence airtight, if the narrative remains alliance first, then the gravitational tug of scandal may weaken, if only for the length of a news cycle. The longer arc, rebuilding distance from Andrew's shadow, rebalancing expectations between palace and government, will take more than a single visit. It will take a run of unremarkable months. In the 24-hour news era, unremarkable is the rarest luxury of all. For now, the outline is stark. A sovereign determined to protect the crown's dignity, a government determined to project national strength, a partner across the Atlantic determined to be received at full volume, and a scandal determined not to fade. The palace can still win the frame, it always has the tools. But frames crack under strain, and this one is. bending under several different hands at once. When the motorcade turns through the Mall and the cameras rise over Buckingham's facade, the question will not be whether Britain can still stage grandeur. It will. The question is what the grandeur will mean, a reaffirmation of alliance, or a carefully lit stage that only throws the shadows into sharper relief. In the coming days, the Crown will try to make the story about continuity, ceremony, and shared interests. The counter-story, about pressure, pasts, and power, will try to write itself in the margins. Which version prevails will depend on what is not said as much as what is. Silence, timing, distance, the oldest tools in the royal kit. They will all be needed now. And when the banquet lights dim and the last toast is offered, the measurement will be brutally simple. Did the visit pass without becoming a referendum on Andrew, a proxy war between palace and government, or a spectacle bent to someone else's script? If the answer is yes, then this uneasy moment will file itself among the many storms the monarchy has outlasted. If not, it will harden into a case study in how quickly ceremony can become collateral when past controversies and present imperatives collide. The palace knows the cost of such lessons. It is trying, urgently, not to pay it again.